I would like to welcome everyone to tonight's Manor Club Zoom meeting. Our guest is Alan Reppert of AccuWeather. Alan, would you introduce yourself and then begin your talk on AccuWeather forecasting pollen and air quality, not just the weather?
Sure. Well, I'm Alan Reppert. I've been with AccuWeather for 20 years now. Graduated from Penn State with a degree in meteorology. Uh, One of the more well-respected degrees for meteorology for colleges for the weather, and took an interest in the pollen and air quality forecasting with some pretty bad pollen allergies, and always been interested in it, and found a niche in it since then. And I'll start this off here. All right, and as I went over, it's going to be a talk about both pollen and air quality. They do share some pretty similar things, as we'll find out, but uh, and they're very interchangeable with effects of pollen and air quality with the weather. So, what is pollen? Uh, Pollen is broken up into several things. It's broken up into tree, grass, weed pollen, and those are primary pollens that we have. Uh, as you can see here, pollen really ranges from it's a very small size, anywhere from about 9 microns, which is even smaller than human hair, to about 160 microns for some of the biggest pollen. Uh, but most of this pollen is able to easily travel in the wind, or it's either picked up by animals, bees, flies, uh, many different animals can pick it up also. Pollen, pollen and air quality times that we typically see the worst effects from. Some people might have issues in the spring or summer or fall with their pollen allergies, and the reason is, uh, first, tree pollen, that's usually in the spring. We see that come out, and it can be quite severe for about a week or two, as a lot of trees start to bloom all at once. Uh, and it's usually done for this area about early early June, late May. That's when the tree pollen starts to diminish a good deal. When the tree pollen diminishes, this grass pollen starts to kick in. That's when we see the grass pollen the worst, and that's typically in the during the summer months. Doesn't usually get as extreme as we see for the tree pollen, but it can last pretty much really from the summer into the fall and until our first freeze. Then we have weed pollen. Weed pollen typically kicks in the late summer and through much of the fall until we have our first freeze, when things start to die off and not grow anymore. And then we have air quality. That's typically a problem in the hot summer days, but it can be a problem really during any time of the year, even in the cold winter months. Uh, Typically, it's worse when we see long dry spells with a strong high pressure in place for the region. Uh, some of the key pollen producers across the mid-Atlantic here. Uh, we have tree pollen. That's broken up mainly into maple, alder, and poplar trees. And you'll notice that most of these trees don't have really any flowers that develop, like apple trees, cherry trees, that sort of thing. Most of the pollen producing plants and that affect people are really not the flowery type ones. Those flowers are typically taken up by taken use the bees and other animals to move their pollen instead of using instead of blowing in the wind, which is what most of the pollen producing plants do. And as we get into the summer, we see grass here. Grass, the main grass subjects are Timothy grass. That's a lot of times grows in fields and in farm areas. And then we have Bermuda grass. That's a very common grass for most people. It can be around golf courses. It can pretty much be anywhere, really. And that's some of the big grass components. And then we get into the weed components. We have sorrel that typically is in fields. Pigweed can grow pretty much anywhere, but it's usually rocky soil. And then we have the big one, which is ragweed. Ragweed is probably one of the worst pollen producers that we see and one of the most reactive for people to have pollen issues. So if you have issues in the late summer and through at least early fall, that's probably what you're having an issue with, the ragweed. Also, goldenrod, some people do confuse the two. Um, Goldenrod does have the golden top on it, and it's more pointy. Ragweed is uh, has many branches on it, so it's typically come out about the same time, but it's easy to confuse the two because of that. And as I said, a lot of the trees that we see there are flowering trees, even the plants that we bring inside, like tulips, things like that. A lot of those are not really going to give you pollen issues. Most of the pollen is really big on those, and it's tough to really move other than from having animals brush up against it, like bees and other creatures. So those are typically confined to the ones that don't produce much in the way of a pollen problem. Uh, and the reason here is we have just a quick diagram of a plant here. We have in the flower we have the pistil, which is what picks up the pollen. We have the stamen, which produce the pollen. And at the bottom of most flowers, there's pretty sweet nectar. That's what the bees all go after, and that's what the bees try and get from plants. So that's what the bees and other animals will go after and pick up the pollen in those areas. So again, a lot of issues that we see with the plants outside, the ones that look really nice, the big blossoms on trees, those are not really much of an issue for most people for pollen. Then we have indoor allergies. Uh, Indoor allergies, the two big ones really are mold and dust mites. Dust mites, even though they say dust and you might clean your house really well, dust mites really hide anywhere. They can be in clothing. They can be in pretty much anything. And dust mites are very reactive for many people. Upwards of 25 to 30% of people have dust mite allergies. So if you have indoor pollen issues and get sneezy whenever you close up the windows in the fall or winter, that could be some of your issue. Along with that, mold can really form anywhere, wet wood, wet basements. That causes a lot of issues with people's allergies. We have animal allergies, cat, dogs, any animal that has hair can really produce allergies. And we also have dust allergies for people that will really take on. Like I said, even though you might clean your house, anybody can really have these issues, no matter how clean you keep your house. So it's a widespread issue. There are some tests for allergies. The common tests, there's a blood test that can be done. Uh, You can easily get that done by a doctor, just a quick blood draw. That will show if you are allergic to something. However, it does sometimes have some false positives. The best test is really the skin test. That's where they put some of the allergens on a little needle and it rubs against your skin to see if you can, if you break out a little weld actually. Um, Takes about 10 to 15 minutes. Not the best test to have, that's for sure. And it can be quite painful, especially when some of these welts really develop. So those are two real tests that we see for testing for uh, allergies. Along with that, um, for the air quality problems, uh, here's a diagram of some of some common things. We have fine sand, which is the uh, on the far left here. We have human hair, um, which is about 50 to 70 microns in diameter. As you can see here, the dust, uh, pollen, and mold particles are all around this size. There's about typically about 3 or 4 of them to a human hair width. Uh, and those are what the pollen issues are and dust. But then we get into more of the air quality issues, and that's where we see uh, anywhere from the 10 microns to the 2.5 microns. Those are when you get the smaller micron uh, particles, those can really get deep into your lungs, cause a lot of breathing problems. Uh, and those are mostly produced from cars, factories, anything that produces that has an engine can really cause problems. And when you breathe in real deep, that can cause a lot of issues for you. Another thing that can cause issues is even water. Uh, we have in the east we have those hot summery days that there's a lot of haze in the air, and those can even cause with all the moisture in the air that can cause problems, kick off people's asthma, and cause other breathing problems just with the moisture holding the particles up in the air. So it's not just pollen, it's not just air quality problems that can cause problems, but you can also get them from if it's a humid day and there's a lot of water in the air. Although uh, most air quality issues are not good, uh, you can get some pretty amazing sunsets and sunrises with fires and air and poor air quality around. These are just some examples that happen in California, especially, but really anywhere that sees fires, even into the Northeast, when we have fires that sweep in from uh, parts of California, Canada, the West Coast. Those can even produce some pretty dramatic sunsets across the Mid-Atlantic, East Coast, and some of that dust can and smoke can even go into parts of Europe and cause problems with air quality even there. Here's an example from last year. We see the little red marks on the screen are where fires are located. Most of the fires were in the west over California, Washington, Oregon, and the northern Rockies. That's where most of the fires were, but you can see smoke that gets drawn up uh, through all the Midwest, the plains, even into parts of the East Coast. And that's just one example. When it gets really smoky and a lot of fires out there, we can see a lot of that smoke and fine particles move into the east, and that you can even smell it at times if it's very concentrated. And then we have dust particles. Dust particles can cause problems with breathing. Uh, and this is an example of dust from Africa going all the way into the United States and the Caribbean Ocean. You see the dust all the way into the Caribbean. Here's one big plume uh, over Cuba and through much of the Caribbean. And then there's another plume back over Africa that's just coming off. Uh, that can be tracked for days. That can move even into parts of the east coast up into even Maine and parts of Canada. So that's another problem that we have with dust particles and can cause issues with breathing. And finally, I'm just going to touch on this briefly. Mold, we can have mold issues. Mold is a lot different than most pollen and air quality. It almost is opposite of the pollen and air quality forecast. So whenever those are low, you probably will have a high mold count just with the way the conditions are. So mold is a lot different than it's almost like a pollen, but it's not. Uh, it's quite different than what we typically see uh, for pollen and air quality forecasting. Now, how do we forecast the pollen, especially at AccuWeather? Well, here, just a little plug for our app. You can see from our app, you can bring up air quality uh, fairly easily, and it shows all the allergens across the area. Um, so it's really easy. Our app, a lot of helpful information can be found for pollen and air quality issues. Even on our website, it's very easy to find that information. It gives you helpful information on what you should do that day if the pollen and air quality is poor. So whenever we forecast pollen, we first really look back at what happened in the past. We'll look back at things such as how much rain has occurred the past few days, weeks, even past few months. If it's been a very dry period, not much is growing. Most of the time, the pollen will not be too high just because of not having much that can possibly grow in that condition. We'll look back at temperatures. If temperatures have been below freezing, we won't have as much of a pollen issue as we would if temperatures were above freezing. So there's many things to look back at in the past weather that can tell us what's going to happen and what's currently happening. We also look at the past pollen amounts that were reported. Uh, Pollen is difficult to measure. Uh, Mostly just doctors' offices measure it. They have a big collector outside that they set out for either 12 hours or 24 hours. They bring it in, they look under the microscope and see what all is in the air and what kind of pollen is in the air. It's very time consuming, so it's very difficult to get actual pollen information for what's happening, but it's very helpful to know what the levels are that uh, from the past few days and even the past few weeks. Another question we have is, when do the leaves come out? When does spring start for an area? That'll help determine really when we have the tree pollen starting, and if we have temperatures dropping below freezing, that'll help us determine that the growing season might be over with, so we might not have much to worry about with pollen anymore. And also, where are the strong winds? Winds transport about 80 to 85% of the pollen from plants. So uh, that's what most pollen is transported with. It's very light. It's very easy to blow around. So that's what causes most of the pollen problems that people have. Here's just an example of what an average year is when the pollen levels typically kick up. Uh, Across the area, most of the time the grass pollen is kicking up really in May and June. That's when we typically see the worst grass pollens, or June and July for the grass pollens. Tree pollens are earlier. They're typically around April into May. And then we get into the ragweed season. That's typically August into early September. And we also have the weed pollen season, which is overlaps with ragweed pretty well. So that's really August and September timeframe for that also. Here is another thing that we use. This is called the spring leaf index. Uh, this is when the leaves come out on the trees. When leaves come out on the trees, that means that we'll typically see the pollen levels really starting to increase. When the pollen levels increase, we can have a very severe tree pollen effects from that. And here's a map that shows when the leaves start coming out on trees across the nation. This was from a few days ago, but it goes back to the beginning of the year even. So you can see anything in red is before, is earlier than normal. Anything is blue, that's blue is later than normal from when it came out. And you can see in the much of the east, it's pretty much been above normal, sooner than normal for when the trees leaves have come out. So um, it's been a continuing trend for most of the nation that we've seen this more red than blue uh, for most years, really across the nation. There was just some cooler weather here in March that really slowed things down across the southeast that kept it from being above normal there. And then finally, we really look at where the air masses are coming from. If we're having warm air coming up from the southeast, that can really bring up some pollen that we're not used to. Uh, Plants that grow in the southeast don't typically grow here. Uh, at least some plants that cause pollen. So if you are seeing problems that whenever the winds kick around and it gets a warmer day or two ahead of after being cold, that can be some of the problems that you're seeing. It's really all dependent on uh, some of this is dependent on where the air is coming from. A wind out of the north, we're typically going to see cooler air. We're going to see more winds. That'll kick up the pollen more so. And then what's happening now? We're looking at where the current weather is, where high pressure air masses are, where storms are passing through, where it's raining. All these will help us to determine what kind of pollen is going to be around, how the air quality is going to be across the area. We look at where there are fires. We can get a good idea on where the smoke and the haze from fires will be several days ahead of time, actually. And also same for dust. We can determine when dust storms will develop and sweep across different areas, and we can forecast where they also go. Here's a quick example of some of the maps that we look at. These show where cold fronts are, warm fronts, where storms are, where high pressure areas are. Typically in an area of high pressure, that's where the air quality could be the worst. In this example, we see air quality could be pretty bad over parts of the plains. Usually where it's raining, we see the air quality and the pollen levels really drop. So over parts of the southeast here, and even into the plains is where we typically will uh, see better air quality, better pollen levels. This is an example of some of the forecasts that are done that show where pollen levels are highest, where pollen levels are lowest, and the current conditions. We can gather if it's high pollen levels over the southeast, and air is going to be coming out of the southeast for the east coast. That can help us to really know that it's going to be a high pollen day uh, or higher pollen days coming up for parts of the northeast, or if it's lower levels over the plains and we're going to be seeing air coming from the plains, we can determine that we might see lower levels because of that. And here's something that we might see here anytime in the spring, really, when we have the really bad pollen. This is all pollen that's washed away. Uh, we typically like to see the pollen really, uh, really wash out a lot of the water, the rain wash out a lot of the pollen from the air. And as that does, it really helps out to keep it to clean out the air and also the air quality too. And then question: how far are our forecasts? Our forecast actually on our website, I believe, we go out 90 days. You can see a 90-day forecast. Would I recommend using that forecast? I don't think so. Um, Most of the forecasts that we do probably are roughly to believe about 5 days out. Um, we can get a general idea on what's going to happen over the next 10 days. We might not have the exact timing of rain, the exact high temperatures, but you can get an idea it's going to be warmer than normal or cooler than normal, rainier or dry weather. So uh, that's really what we like to look at for timing of when this rain of our forecast actually. Uh, then finally, we see these are called thunderstorms can actually produce more asthma and pollen issues for people. It'll kick up the pollen into the storms and it can push them several hundred miles away. This is an example of what we use for air quality measurements, especially with fires and smoke around. Uh, from graphics like this, we can tell where fires are, and we see where the smoke plumes are. In this example, a lot of the smoke uh, is over the Gulf of Mexico and into Florida. That's where we see most of the smoke issues with this example. But uh, we use this to really look at where we can have smoke and haze and issues from fires. And then air quality. This is what is used for air quality. When it's in the green, that's good. Really, no concern with air quality for going outside. As we go deeper into darker red colors, we see uh, moderate and unhealthy for sensitive groups. That's when you should, if you do have some asthma issues, breathing issues, anybody with lung or heart issues can really have some problems during these days. As we get to unhealthy air, really anybody that has problems breathing can have issues, and as we get into the very unhealthy, that's really when anybody should really avoid going outside. If you have to go out, best times, and this is true for air quality and pollen, are usually in the morning hours or later in the day, during the heart of the day and into the early evening is when you should really try and avoid going outside if you are suffering from pollen and air quality issues. Um, and the question is everything now computerized, or how much intervention and forecasting for pollen or even the weather? We really do have a lot of automation. Like most fields, we're getting more and more computers into the weather. Uh, we do have a lot, at least at AccuWeather, we have a lot of human intervention. Human forecasters look at pretty much every forecast. We'll at least look at a map, say we need to be rainier in some areas or dry in some areas, warmer, cooler, more pollen, less pollen. We really have control over not only just the US, but the entire world we look at. So uh, we can really look at all these different things across the world and determine what's going to happen, not only with the pollen, but with the weather forecast. And then as we get into what's going to happen, uh, this brings us to the computer models. There's a lot of computer models available for us. There's probably uh, hundreds of computer models across not only the US, but the world. We can look at all these different weather models, see if it's going to rain, if it's going to be dry. Uh, and related to pollen and air quality, whenever it's raining, we can determine it's probably going to be lower pollen levels because of that. If it's a high pressure area, we can see uh, where it's going to be sunny, where the pollen levels might be higher. And then some of the output that we get, and this is where meteorologists really come into play with this. We'll look at this data, we'll see uh, on this chart, we see temperatures near the surface, we see uh, moisture near the surface, moisture higher in the atmosphere, and even how much rain is expected to occur. Now, this is just one computer model. It can be wrong, it can be right. Uh, Sometimes we might think it's right, sometimes we might think it's wrong. Might be vice versa, we're not sure. But sometimes most of the time, we can get a pretty good idea on what's going to happen by looking at these. Several models we look at and really determine an average of what's going to happen and see what the possibilities are for happening. This was actually over the weekend here. We did see some snow in parts of Pennsylvania and even New York uh, on Sunday here with the cold air around. So it was a snowy Mother's Day for some people in northern Pennsylvania and into the Catskills of New York. So it wasn't just a rainy time like some people saw here. And then question here on TV, we see a lot of talk about the European model. That's a model that's run in the United Kingdom. Actually, it's a forecast that's produced by them. They will typically disseminate it to across the world. It's a worldwide model. It forecasts the same in the United Kingdom as the United States. There's been some storms that the European model has done very well on. Sandy is a prime example. It really forecast Sandy well. That was about 10 years ago when it came into Long Island, New York City, New Jersey area, and brought some strong winds, flooding, rain, and even some snow into parts of the higher elevations of Pennsylvania, West Virginia. So that's just one of the models. There's the United States model is called the GFS, Global Forecasting System. That typically forecasts for across the world, but there's other nations that have forecasts that they do. So we really try and look at all that information, look at the examples like this and say, well, is it really something that's going to happen? And here's an example of what happens with most days when there's a high pressure system and when it's windy, a nice day for air quality. We see the winds really kicking up, things really getting mixed well. So you're not having the air quality issues on days that are usually windy, days that are sunny. You don't typically sunny, windy days, even days with some storms around. You won't typically see a lot of the air quality issues. However, when there's a high pressure overhead, that has sinking air usually associated with it. That keeps air trapped at the surface. Any factories, any cars, anything like that can stay at the surface and really keep things from escaping and moving too much. That's what we typically see the issues with air quality. Much like we have with pollen, the same things with pollen are with air quality. And what can make pollen better or worse? There's several things. Rain will help pollen. It'll wash it out of the air. When we have freezing temperatures, that'll help kill uh, stop the growth of most plants and trees. Even temporarily, as we get into the warmer months, there might have been some frost or freeze that we saw in March and into April. That can slow things down for pollen. if it's less windy, we typically see better pollen. Uh, if the dry weather lasts for several days, 5 to 7 days even, we can see the pollen really get washed out. Less plants growing, especially as we look at grass and to weed pollen. Uh, that's typically when we see less pollen out. And also on very hot days. Very hot days are usually things won't grow as quickly. They'll try and conserve moisture and uh, not produce the pollen that we would see. Here's an example of the first of the last freeze in spring and the first freeze in the fall. Uh, Across much of New York, Pennsylvania, we see uh, that date is typically around April 15th through May 15th is the last freeze we typically see. So uh, anybody that plants gardens knows this well, and usually tries to plant after these days so things don't get killed off. And then we have the last day of the first freeze, rather. That typically occurs in October time frame, sometimes early November. Drought. Here's an example of what we see with drought. Um, Areas that we have drought, we're not going to typically see things growing as quickly, and we might not even have plants really growing at all. Across parts of the Southwest, if it's a really dry winter, and even in the spring, there can be times that there's really not many plants to grow. When there's not many plants that grow, it's not really going to have the many pollen issues that we would see. And what makes pollen problems worse? Uh, any recent rainfall with about 2 to 3 days later, we see a lot of plants really taking off, a lot of grass really taking off. That can cause a lot of pollen problems for people. Uh, we see seasonal temperatures as temperatures are really about average. Most plants really like that. Most plants growing in different areas will really like that. As we see more wind, that'll kick up the pollen a lot easier and uh, make it worse pollen conditions for most people. As we have cool mornings and warm afternoons, of the cool mornings we see dew around that can help to have the plants get a little bit more growth just from the dew around the cool mornings. Then the warm afternoons are when they start to spread their pollen out especially well. And also early start to spring or a late end of the fall. That can cause more problem issues. We saw that this year that there was a really strong surge in tree pollen across much of the East Coast. We see pictures of trees just dropping pollen like crazy. That's very typical here. Uh, and really, with the drought, we can predict drought. We can do a pretty good job of predicting it. Ending drought and when they begin are a little bit more difficult, but we will see droughts once we're in a drought or once we're coming out of a drought. It's a lot easier for meteorologists to really get that information and forecast that. And here, what makes the air quality better? You're going to see a lot of the same things with air quality that we see with pollen. Whenever it's rain or snow, it can make air quality better. Cold weather will make air quality better. Uh, Even dry air, when it's dry and you don't have the moisture around and the humid air, that will make air quality better. Um, However, sometimes with the stronger winds, it does help to mix things, move along the pollutants and make for better air quality. And things that make it worse whenever it's calm winds, dry weather. Dry weather can really stop the the rain from washing things out of the atmosphere, so they can hang around for a lot longer. When it's very hot, typically over the summer, especially in most of the cities in the Northeast, it can get very bad air quality just from that. And With the pandemic, it actually did improve air quality for many parts of the not only U.S. but the world. Uh, Plants were shut down. Uh, People were not driving as much, so it really did help to make air quality better. And last year, at least into the early summer, it was actually one of the fewest air quality alert days in New York and Washington D.C. than we've seen in quite some time. So uh, one of the good things about the pandemic was that we did get better air quality from it. So uh, and then finally, how can you be your own forecaster? Go into a little bit here to help you really look at what we can do to make things to get a good estimate on when's the best days to get out, when are bad days to get out. Anytime that it rains, rain will help air pollen, wash the pollen out of the air, and also to make the air quality better. If it's dry weather, the air quality will typically be worse, and we'll also see the pollen levels typically higher than if it's raining. If it's cool temperatures below freezing, we won't have many allergens. We probably won't have much in the way of air quality issues. Anything above freezing, we can really see the pollen levels increase uh, and issues with air quality. Uh, Check your pollen forecast. Pollen forecasts are really made by AccuWeather. We have many, they go out 15 days, and really anywhere you can get pollen forecasts for multiple locations. Also, the government websites for air quality, there's a lot of air quality sensors that are run by the government and also private companies to get that information. Uh, Another question here: as a profession, are there more forecasters in past years? Uh, there are actually, we typically see a glut of forecasters graduating college. There's a lot more forecasters than there are job positions most of the time. But we're producing more forecasts. We forecast not only for what you see on like TV and in newspaper. There's energy forecasts that are involved. Companies can save millions of dollars by being able to predict if what the temperatures are going to be over the summer. People use less air conditioning. Cooler temperatures mean that we see less problems with needing to produce more energy. So there's forecasting all over, even forecasting for nuclear power plants. The Nuclear Regulatory Committee has forecasters that just forecast every day in case there's fallout from a nuclear reactor. So there's really a lot of forecasters that across the world that forecast many different things. So and it continues to get more and more every year. Some of the forecast locations that we use to come up with our forecasts: AAAAI, it's a allergy network from doctors. They have observations here. We have some from New York and into New Jersey. We typically have to watch those if you're looking at these just to make sure that they're current. Sometimes they can be half a year old, like the one from October here. Here on AccuWeather.com and on our app, you can see pollen levels, and it even gives you helpful advice on what to do and make sure that you're planning your activities accordingly and making sure you're taking a allergy medication or breathing medication for poor air quality. And we forecast weed, ragweed pollen, grass pollen, tree pollen, even mold and dust and dander. They're all different things that we forecast. Dust and dander is usually for inside conditions. This is the National Phenology Network. This is really when this is what we looked at earlier to see when spring starts in the area and when the leaves come out. We look at this and get information on when leaves are coming out, when the growing season is really starting. So this is a site that we use and fairly fairly helpful information from this. And for air quality, we look at airnow.gov. It's run by the government here. It can give the forecast and the current air quality based on monitors nearby, and also from forecasts for the that are produced by the federal government. We see, you can bring it up, the different pollutants, ozone, and all the PM 2.5 and PM 10. Those will all be displayed here, and you can see on a map even how much pollen is for different areas, or how much air quality problems you might have for different areas. Here's another site that not only looks at the U.S. but looks at the entire world. It's the World Air Quality Information website. It brings up all these different locations that they have sensors for it, so you can see if parts of the southeast or the Gulf Coast might be moderate or unhealthy air quality, even though it might be good air quality across much of the east. One thing that we always like to look at, thing that we always get a kick out of, is going to China and parts of East Asia. We see how extreme it is for air quality over there. Most days this is either unhealthy or very unhealthy, or pretty much people should stay at home. Whenever it's red here, it's basically maxed out. So this is typical of a lot of East Asia, unfortunately. So they have a lot more air quality issues than much of the U.S. And also the Weather Service on their website, they have some forecasts that they issue for fire, for air quality here, so you can get alerts from them on what's happening or what they're expecting. That's typically about 2 to 3 days out. They can even alert you to if it's going to be smoky, if there's a high fire threat, if there's poor air quality. And then for the future of pollen, as we see with global warming, temperatures are getting warmer. Because they're getting warmer, and they're getting warmer earlier in the season, and they're staying warm later in the year, we will see increases in pollen. Not only that, but we see the pollen starts earlier, lasts longer, and because it's warmer, it can be even more severe. The chart on the right, the left here, it shows anything in red is basically starting earlier in the season. For the start of the pollen season, and anything in red is a longer pollen season. So pollination is beginning earlier and ending later. So that's not a good combination if you're looking for better pollen levels and air quality across the U.S. And for future pollen, we also run into issues of more CO2. As there's more CO2 in the atmosphere, trees, plants, anything grows easier. As they grow more and grow bigger plants, we see more issues with pollen being produced by all these. Along with that, pollen is moving into new areas. We see plants that couldn't grow in parts of the Northeast and the Mid-Atlantic 20, 30 years ago being able to grow into parts of Virginia, even into Pennsylvania, New Jersey, New York, Maryland area. So those are some of the issues that we see with the warmer weather around. Also, more asthma issues are occurring just because of warmer temperatures. As I said earlier, warmer temperatures, we see uh, more air quality issues and more stagnant air around the area. And some of our tips that we have to avoid air air pollutants and air pollen issues, really stay inside during the middle of the day. If you need to go out, do it early in the day or wait until the evening hours. It can really help you. It can help to uh, avoid the pollen and when the air quality is typically the worst. Uh, Recommend if you are on any allergy medication like Zyrtec, Allegro, whatever it might be, really take it before you start to see your pollen issues. It can help a lot to uh, hinder hinder your allergies and runny nose, watery eyes, those sort of things. If you are outside, try and change your clothes as soon as possible once you get inside. Keep the allergens outside and keep things comfortable inside, really. And also, if you can run AC, run air conditioning, it helps, or at least keep the windows closed. It helps to keep the bad air out and at least the better air in, as long as you don't have indoor allergy issues. And finally, to wrap things up, we see this is a tree from this year that with all the pollen coming out of it, this is why we see those high spikes in tree pollen at times early in the year. But pollen is everywhere. But if you take care and try your best, it doesn't really have to affect you. You can avoid the issues that come from the pollen. Uh, Take your medicine daily. But if you have bad allergies, really see an allergist. They can really help out and determine what you are most allergic to. Weather plays a key factor in both pollen and air quality. If it's rainy, it's going to be a lot better pollen and air quality issues than if it's been a dry and sunny spell that we're in. And allergies are getting worse just from global warming and more plants and plants growing quicker. And more people are being diagnosed with pollen issues than we've seen in the past. And thank you for attending this. And I'd be glad to take any questions you might have, either pollen, weather forecasting, whatever they might be.
Thank you, Alan. If anyone has questions, you can type them into the chat room. Anyone?
And as we wait for questions, little brief introduction of AccuWeather. We're in State College, Pennsylvania, which is the home to Penn State. Probably about half of our forecasters are actually from Penn State. There's several now that we're actually getting from the State University of New York schools. We're getting several now from many of those programs. But we've been in business for over 55 years. Started forecasting for actually a ski resort. That was our first forecast over 55 years ago. Now you can see us on TV, radio, internet. We even forecast for things like the Masters. We give a forecast to the Masters. We forecast for sporting events. Really anything you can imagine, we forecast for. It's really branched out from just giving a forecast to a paper. We even forecast for energy companies that they're looking for how much sunshine is going to happen for solar panels and energy production that way. So We really forecast for pretty much anything you can imagine.
Well, it's been very informative. We thank you. We thank you, Alan. I guess there's no additional questions. Marion, you have no questions?
I wonder if this has been a cooler spring than normal.
Well, it started off, we did see a little warmer conditions here in the early part of the spring, but it does look like it's going to stay cooler here for at least the next several weeks. But we are looking at some warmer temperatures here for summer. And also we'll have to watch for tropical systems, especially towards September and October. We could see some tropical systems that come into the area. So unfortunately, it looks like it's going to be active towards the end of the summer and into the fall.
All right, Alan, we thank you very much. And thank you everyone who attended. This is our last evening Zoom program of the season for the Manor Club. Thank you all. Good night.